Hey, Originals listeners. I know a lot of our youngster listeners are probably tuning into this episode to hear from the co-star of 2.5 Men, a show which premiered practically yesterday. I'm going to take a look. What year did it actually premiere? Oh, it was 2003? Okay, well, anyway, before we get to the newfangled stuff, let's tempt the fair use gods to conjure Duckie. I've pulled out my vinyl from when I was a teen. I located my padded disc washer record cleaner. I squirted it with some of that D3 liquid cleaner, which to this day, I'm still convinced is just water, and sponged the decades of dust off my Pretty in Pink soundtrack. If you were anywhere near my age, were at all a disaffected teenager, you will remember pretty much the entirety of this album.
Make you last, touch you once, I touch you twice.
Starts out with a swirling OMD romantic theme, then immediately shuts the party down with a thinky, plinky little Suzanne Vega number. But not for long, because a couple songs later, there's this explosive opening drum and guitar of the psychedelic Fur song, which gave the movie its title. But then, of course, we flip over the album. And I really don't know what New Order was referring to when they said, the deeper you get, the sweeter the pain. But I do recall fully emotionally sharing the sentiment when I was 14. And then echoing the Bunnymen croon about self-sabotage. Then, of course, Morrissey ends the album with a little Smith's lullaby to put on the radio when you start the car with the garage door down.
So please, 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 let me get what I want this time.
These were the bands I loved, and I think I first learned about most of them from this album, though at the time, I'm sure I said I was way into them long before the soundtrack came out. This is The Originals, and I'm your host, Andrew Goldman. I spent decades interviewing celebrities for magazines, the vast majority of whom were just there to sell something and shared very little of themselves. So I created The Originals to interview cultural figures who actually had something to say, wanted to express something real. And there's nothing I personally love more than a comeback, probably because I'm still holding out hope for my own. But anyway, as you might be able to tell already, I was a big fan of John Hughes movies, but the character I most identified with was Duckie from 1986's Pretty in Pink, played by today's guest, Jon Cryer. Like Duckie, I was a little obsessive with my crushes. I seldom actually got the girl, but I had good tall hair, I could dance, apparently a very punchable face, and was often assumed to be gay. Jon Cryer, the 56-year-old actor who played him, grew up in the Upper West Side. His mom, Gretchen, was a successful playwright, and his dad, David, a character actor who spent decades on Broadway in Evita and Phantom of the Opera. Cryer, of course, was transcendent as Duckie, but then, as you're about to hear, for some reason, just disappeared. We've arrived at the 8th episode of the season, produced in proud partnership with Los Angeles Magazine. Jon Cryer, welcome to The Originals.
I am so happy to be here.
So, John, I have to tell you, last night, I feel bad about this. I never saw I think it was it your feature film debut? It was No Small Affair with Demi Moore. And we're going to be talking about somebody who you also resembled as a youngster. But I'm watching it and I'm like, who does he look like? And I'm thinking to myself, he's got a little Pete Davidson in him. Have you heard that before?
Yes, that has been remarked upon in the past. Actually, by Pete Davidson himself. His first joke when he did stand-up, he told me, was he would come out on stage, people would give him some smattering of applause, and he would say, no, I'm not the gay guy from 2.5 Men. And yeah, we resemble each other quite a bit. He and I actually did a movie called Big Time Adolescence together, and he's quite wonderful in it. But yeah, we've got a very similar vibe. He's taller than me, and I don't know that I have the famously big dick energy that he supposedly exudes. Yeah. He's as mystified by that as anybody.
But I'm watching I'm watching No Small Affair, and I think everybody is sort of scratches their head and thinks, like, why does this guy? But I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, God, Jon Cryer, very, very charming. I mean, you could have, I don't know, it seems like with the right play, with the right game, you could have gone through the Kaya Gerbers, the Kim Kardashians, the Ariana Grandes, the Kate Beckinsales of the day. Now, did you use that Pete Davidson energy before we know who Pete Davidson was to sort of cut a swath through all those starlets?
Those women are rightfully mine. Yes, you're absolutely right. because that's how it works. No, I wouldn't say that I cut a swath back in the day. I did date my co-star in that movie, Demi Moore. The only reason I mentioned that, besides being ridiculously proud of it, is and looking for an excuse to bring it up at every occasion.
How did you find out that you lost your virginity to Demi Moore? Because I know that I have read your memoir, and your memoir, I have to say, was very chaste. You did say that you were very, very excited to date Demi Moore, and I was very jealous because I had a huge crush on her when she was it Jackie Templeton from General Hospital?
Oh my gosh, nice pulling that name out of a hat.
But I had a huge thing for Demi Moore. But you write very chastely of your affair and no small affair, and I came away from your memoir thinking, oh, they made out, maybe they got to second or third base, but then come to find out, you actually made love to Demi Moore, and I find that out because she writes it in her memoir, and she says that she took your virginity and felt very guilty about it. She said she wrote, and I quote, "It pains me to think of how callous I was with his feelings, that I stole what could have been such an important and beautiful moment with him." From him.
Exactly. And I felt the need to set the record straight, actually, because I felt that she may have gotten the impression she was taking my virginity due to my lack of skill. That was a mistaken impression because technically I had actually already lost my virginity in high school. But I felt the need to correct her publicly only because she expressed that she felt bad about it. And I wanted her to understand that she need not feel bad about it at all. That in fact, what we had was lovely, but it was not my first. Honestly, I was very, very young. I think I was 19 when I got involved with her. She was a little bit older. I think she was 22, a little more experienced in the world. And I did an emotional belly flop. I was just, it's like what happens when you suddenly realize you're in a relationship with Demi Moore. You go, oh my God. I can't.
You made her sound like dating her like incredibly fun in the way sort of romances seem incredibly fun in John Hughes movies. Was it?
Yes, she's an incredibly fun person. Absolutely. She was also, she was a star of a soap opera at the time that was a big deal, and she knew everybody, and she knew all the musicians in Los Angeles, and she, went out everywhere cool. I came from New York City, and I was not one of the cool people there. I was kind of a dork, and so I was in awe of her to some respect. So, I think I fell a lot deeper than she did at the time. But, I have there's certainly no regrets. And she, I certainly wouldn't want her to come away feeling badly about the relationship.
So now that we've gotten Pete Davidson out of the way, when you first started out, your first big breaks, I think that you attribute to the fact that you resembled Matthew Broderick, correct? And this was something that occurred to me, but I didn't actually know it was a thing until I read your memoir. That when you were auditioning for plays, for instance, Harvey Fierstein, who wrote Torch Song Trilogy, he audibly gasped when he saw you because he thought you were basically a clone. And a lot of your early breaks were because you actually resembled him. What did you get because of him? And do you have any ambivalence about that?
I got two parts that, actually three, now that you mention it. There was three parts where he absolutely blazed the trail. There was Torch Song Trilogy, which ended up winning the Tony for Best Play. There was Brighton Beach Memoirs, in which Matthew Broderick actually won the Tony for Best Actor. And then actually, No Small Affair was originally cast with Matthew Broderick and Sally Field.
Sally Field?
Yes, swear to God. They were going a different way. So yeah, it's hard for me to avoid feeling like, that my career definitely was in his well-worn footsteps, When he first started off Broadway in Torch Song Trilogy, people used to come up to me in my job as an usher at a theater much farther uptown and say, hey, you were great in Torch Song Trilogy. And I was like, I have no idea what you people are talking about. Here's your seats, A101 and 102. And it wasn't till months later that I was walking by the theater where Brighton Beach Memoirs was playing that I actually saw a picture of Matthew Broderick. And I was like, oh, I get it. We look a lot alike. Yeah. But interestingly, once, after Ferris came out and Pretty in Pink came out, I'm talking about Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which was, an enormous breakthrough hit for him. Our paths kind of diverged, in terms of he was much more known for that, and I had sort of the sort of bizarre, lovable outsider was my area. So once we had kind of defined ourselves that way, our careers diverged pretty significantly.
I have to say, watching Pretty in Pink at 49 is an odd, kind of destabilizing experience, but one that I highly recommend. As you're about to hear, there was a lot of stuff in the movie about money and class that came off a lot differently this time around. As someone who grew up in a home closer to the dump Molly Ringwald lived in with her dad, Harry Dean Stanton, than James Spader's mansion, I initially saw the film as a triumph of the state cheese crowd, but I'm not so sure about that anymore. It might have felt more that way had the movie been released with the original ending John Hughes wrote. I may be the very last person on earth to have learned this, but in the film that we all saw, Andy, the Molly Ringwald character, ends up with Blane, Andrew McCarthy's character, but originally she'd ended up with Duckie and tells Blane to go get bent. But when test audiences saw it, they almost revolted, and they had to go back and reshoot the ending. And I gotta say, it's pretty funny. If you do watch it, please notice how bad Andrew McCarthy's wig is in the final prom scene. He'd cut his hair for another movie and needed to wear this wig during reshoots. And after seeing this, I think in retrospect, it's possible a lot of Andrew McCarthy's sex appeal might have resided in his hair, or at least his real hair. One thing that was exactly the same was how fantastic Jon Cryer was as Duckie. For my money, he and James Spader are the real stars of this movie. Here's a little clip of Duckie confronting Andy in the back of the Trax record store. Now, this is just after he's done his mating dance to Otis Redding's Try a Little Tenderness, and it's the moment after he realizes she's going on a date with Blane. One little note, the major appliance line that's so great in this was a Cryer improvisation.
Duckie, I'm really sorry.
Is this, you're gonna go out with this guy? I mean, is this, like a date or?
Yeah. I mean, you'll like him. He's not like the other guys. Seriously.
No, what? Andy! You really pissed me off, because they shit all over everybody, including you. I can't believe you'd be this stupid.
Who's shitting on me? I'm not gonna let anybody shit on me.
He's gonna use your ass and throw you away. God, I would have died for you.
So what am I supposed to do? He asked me out and I like him. If I hate him because he's got money, just listen to me. If I hate him because he's got money, that's the exact same thing as them hating us because we don't. Do you understand?
You can't do this and respect yourself. You can't.
Well, I'll make that decision, all right?
Sure, you can do what you want.
You're talking like that just because I'm going out with Blane.
Blane? His name is Blane? Oh, that's a major appliance. That's not a name.
Just because I'm going out with Blane doesn't mean I can't be friends with you. I mean, it doesn't change the way I feel about you.
Oh, that's very nice. I'm glad. Here's the point, Annie. I'm not particularly concerned with whether or not you like me. Because I live to like you, and I can't like you anymore. So when you get your heart splattered all over hell and you're feeling really low and dirty, don't look to me to help pump you back up, because maybe for the first time in your life I won't be there.
I don't know if it was because of my particular age, but I don't know if I ever listened to an album more than I listened to the Pretty in Pink album. Did you have it? You probably didn't have that experience, right? Actually having been in the movie?
Yes, I absolutely shared that experience with you. That was sort of the definitive film soundtrack of its time. And yeah, when I first met John Hughes, it was very important to him to talk about the music I liked. He wanted to know, and mostly because I was, still basically a teenager, and I think he always wants to do kind of the research of, hey, what are you into, And I was into a lot of the same bands he was into. And he said, oh, okay, then I want to play for you this band that I just found called Flesh for Lulu, which I had never heard of at the time, a British band. The music was always incredibly important to him. And so, in fact, towards the end of Pretty in Pink, I remember Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, who ended up writing If You Leave, which became such a big hit for the album. They actually came to the set. A lot of the time.
Oh, if you leave written for Pretty in Pink? I didn't realize that.
And in fact, they had to rewrite it when they changed the ending. They had when the guys showed up. First of all, it was very cool because I knew them and I was a fan, and I was so hoping at some point that the Psychedelic Furs would show up, and they did eventually. But the first band to show up was OMD, and I remember feeling like, wow, this thing is for real. You know?
Did John Hughes write it after hearing Pretty in Pink by the Psychedelic Furs, or was that something that he decided to call it after? Do you know?
He had heard the song Pretty in Pink, and he knew and that inspired him to write something sort of about Molly. Molly Ringwald had worked with Molly on Breakfast Club, and that was my understanding of how it came about. I mean, she has a friend who is probably clearly has more feelings for her than she had for him.
Well, the ending, this was somewhat of a revelation to me because, I remember it. You know, it's so interesting watching the film. It's probably not been, it's been 20 years since I've seen it. And so I watched it again last night with fresh knowledge that the ending in which Duckie, your character, Philip Duckie Dale, he's had a falling out with Andy, Molly Ringwald's character, and they reunite on prom night in the hallway. They see each other and they embrace, and it looks like they're going to sort of ride off into the sunset and go to the prom together. However, they go inside the prom and he steps away when he sees Molly looking at Andrew McCarthy, the Blane character, and basically says, I can tell that Andy is in love with Blane and I'm going to do the right thing and I'm going to step away and go have fun. But this was not the original ending as written and shot, correct?
No, that is not the original ending as shot. For a long time, there had been this controversy about the ending of that movie. There were people who felt that Molly's character ending up with Andrew McCarthy at the end of the movie was a big kind of sellout. You know, that she should have been with Duckie, the quirky, interesting guy. But a lot of people pointed out, hey, but they didn't have that kind of romantic chemistry, you know, and also he was kind of a stalker, you know, and there was there's been all kinds of, it's been interesting because the culture has sort of reappraised the movie every few years or so. You know, and the first wave was she should have gone with Duckie, the goofball. Yeah. Then the second wave was, no, Duckie's kind of creepy because he's never direct with his feelings. He's always kind of hiding that.
It's funny because there's the scene where Duckie is saying, I've got to tell her I love her. I got to tell her I love her. And it just seems to me that it's pretty obvious to her already that he loves her. No, I feel like that's pretty obvious. But I mean, what's interesting, there is some stalkerish elements about Duckie. He rides the bike back and forth, but he is obviously in love with her. So yes, I'm on Team Duckie.
Okay,
anyway.
Good.
Let's
just establish that before we proceed.
Yes, I am on team. I'm fully Team Duckie.
Okay, good. I can proceed. But it's been interesting because it was always kind of posed as this binary that she should have ended up either with Andrew or with Duckie romantically. And I went back and read the original script, and the original script didn't have her, even though she didn't end up with Andrew McCarthy's character romantically, she didn't necessarily end up with Duckie romantically at the end either. The script was actually a lot more subtle than that. It was, and if I can just sort of paraphrase it now, basically, Duckie shows up at the prom for her. You know, he's kind of the hero who walks her in. Andrew McCarthy's character shows up, apologizes to her. She says, thank you for apologizing, but, I don't need this, basically. And she ends up dancing the moonlight dance with Duckie while Heroes plays. And they're sort of joking and laughing together. So it was not that they necessarily ended up together romantically. It was just that she rejected Andrew McCarthy's character. And that was what I think really bothered people about the test audiences. I think that the test audiences reacted to, no, we bought into this romance between Molly and Andrew. He seems like a good guy. He came back. He apologized. And yet she's saying, no thanks, I don't want any part of this. And it was meant to be a class consciousness thing. It was meant to be her saying, I reject the whole, Prince Charming thing, that this Prince Charming is going to save me. But the audiences really bought into the relationship between Molly and Andrew. And that's why when they actually saw the original cut of the movie, and this became legendary years later, they booed. They booed at the end of it.
You've written as much that this must have hurt you to hear that this ending in which you end up, it doesn't sound like you end up necessarily romantically with her, but you end up with her. Did this hurt that audiences so roundly rejected this?
Yes and no. On some level, I expected it. Andrew was kind of a dreamboat at the time and was, in a lot of, he was considered, very much a romantic leading man, and I was not, and I was always.
But you did get Demi Moore in the. See, this is the thing that surprised me is that you did, in no small affair, end up consummating what I thought was going to be unrequited love with Demi Moore. So you actually had been in a movie where you did get the girl.
Yes. But the weird thing is I've never been comfortable with that, just as a person and as an actor. I mean, yes, that's what happened. But I've never felt super comfortable in the role of a romantic lead. So on some level, I kind of expected that something was going to be up with that. But, there's a little part of you that goes, maybe I should have created chemistry with Molly some way that you could have felt it on screen. I wasn't crushed. I was just kind of, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, John, and I want to share them with you after watching this movie. So you can say that James Spader is. I don't think that James Spader necessarily hates Andy because she's poor. I think James Spader hates her because she won't put out for him. But she is the one that actually is talking mostly about the class consciousness. And I had forgotten that there is a scene in which she's driving around the rich people's neighborhood and parks in front of one of the houses and fantasizes, what is it like in there? And I think that coming from a background with Harry Dean Stanton, who obviously has some sort of problem that's preventing him from going out and working, that she would be seeking some comfort. And the fact that she ends up with Blane and the fact that the Annie Potts character at the end, Iona, who is the rebel who owns the track store, at the very end ends up conforming. She ends up going out with a yuppie and wearing this muffy outfit and being sort of shrugging her shoulders and being to Molly Ringwald oh, he's really cute and he's obviously very rich. So I'm like, what is this? What is this movie about? This movie is about basically poor people marrying rich guys.
Well,
isn't it?
It was meant to be about cross-class romance. And what was nice about it was in the 80s, there were not a lot of teen movies that were cognizant of class, which really did exist and still does exist in America. People don't want to admit it. And I think people like that. They kind of found that it was a fresh look at it. But yes, in the end, it's funny. I joked about it at the time, but, I felt like John Hughes didn't want people to just completely give up on falling in love with rich people. I think he cares about rich people deeply and wants people to know. There might be a rich person in your future.
This guy did not come from the wrong side of the tracks, did he? He came from, he was reasonably affluent as a kid, correct?
Yes. And I think he wanted to have the movie's message be one of hope for cross-class romance.
Hope for the poor people so that they don't have to live with, poor old Harry Dean Stanton so they can go live on the other side of town, because that's kind of what I got from it last night. I was like, holy shit, this is sort of Wall Street. This is sort of greed is good a little bit.
I don't think that that's what he was going for. One could argue that for income inequality to truly be taken care of is if every rich person married a poor person, you could completely obliterate income inequality. But I don't know, man. And
I also, wondered, you have said that working with the two actors in it, Molly and Andrew McCarthy, that neither one of them, you didn't really have an extreme chemistry. I think you described both of them as ice cubes at one point in your memoir, that this was not sort of warm. But I was looking at the scenes with she and Andrew, and I was like, there's one scene in the record store where I actually see chemistry. I didn't think that that she was all that much fun. I mean, they didn't seem to have any fun together.
That's a fair point. They, interestingly, they were a bit frosty on the set to each other as well. Both of them are kind of remote people. They just take a minute to warm up to people. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a New Yorker, so I'm kind of extrovert and, got to get to know everybody and got to, hey, everybody love me. And they just were not that kind of people. And what I did not know, by the way, at the time, and Andrew apparently gets into some depth on in his memoir, is he was already struggling with alcoholism. I did not know that. at the time. I just thought he was kind of a distant guy. Same thing with Molly. Molly was not dealing with alcoholism, mind you, but I just thought she was kind of a distant person. So, I tried to hang back a little and not get in their face too much.
I went up to her. I went up to her not too long ago in the last couple of years at an event before COVID, and I wanted to talk to her about her New Yorker piece. And this was not like a huge sort of. This was not like sort of accosting her at a cafe. I mean, it was a fairly sort of small invited event, and I'm a very gregarious person, and I haven't felt somebody sort of quite as frosty as she was. But she was like decidedly unfriendly. And I was like, boy, she's nothing like she is in the movies. And then I saw the movie and I'm like, well, actually, maybe she is.
I did not find her unfriendly. That was not my experience. She, she's not extrovert. She is not somebody who's, always going to try to fill the air with words. She is somebody who's going to hang back and keep her own counsel. And, that's just who she is. And interestingly, I think on film, it actually helps her because I think a lot of great actors are performers who keep a lot to themselves, who you as a viewer project onto, and I think that was one of the great things about her. But she would, she, by the way, knew that I was new in town in Los Angeles, bent over backwards to invite me out to events with her friends, she invited me to her birthday party. She would do those things, and then I'd get there and we would have these incredibly awkward conversations.
Well, maybe she's, maybe I should give her the benefit of the doubt and say that she's socially awkward.
Yes, perhaps that's a better way of saying it, because I in all my years of dealing with her, and we've occasionally reconnected, she's lovely and very caring and always remembers about your family and wants to talk about your family. I mean, she's not she's just conversationally remote.
Yeah. And you are not. You seem to me, I feel like a certain kinship with you. You're not Jewish, but no, you're not Jewish, but you're frequently mistaken for being Jewish. I'm half Jewish. We both actually, I was in my high school because this was the second time they performed Working at Deering High School, and both times they found a Jew to play the grape picker, and I did the song. I know you got fired from the song, but you wrote you got fired from the part, but I played the grape picker that you almost played in Working.
Oh my goodness.
And I saw.
Well, first of all, we should let the audience know what we're talking about. We're talking about a musical called Working, which was based on a Dud-ster book, and it was a lovely show about the honor of just going day to day and going to work.
Can you sing that? Can you sing a song?
Un mejor dia vendrá.
Un mejor dia vendrá.
Obviously,
Cuando, come on, John, don't leave me hanging.
I'm going to leave you.
Cuando Dios
de los pobres,
a los pobres un lugar dará.
You know what?
Oh, yes.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is why I was fired from that. But no, of course, when you think migratory farm worker, you think Jon Cryer. No, that was one of the first times I ever got bumped from a part, and it actually happened at the theater camp that I was training at, and that's so I was like 14 at the time or 15. But it was interesting because even then I said, I'm not the right guy for this. I'm not the right guy for every part. And yes, I.
Oh my God! I'm just thinking this. I have this horrible memory. I'm just thinking back that can I be retroactively? I think that they darkened my skin for this.
Oh no! Oh no!
I think they did. Can they cancel the whole theater department in a public school?
Probably not. It's lovely that they were.
Whose fault is that? Is it the department or is it my own fault? Should I have stood up and God, that's awful. I want to finish one thing with Duckie. So Molly Ringwald, years after Pretty in Pink, makes predictions or sort of says where she thinks the cast is. And she says she thinks Duckie would have come out by now. And, I watched it and as a somewhat sort of flamboyant, frequently, effeminate, like you, crosses my legs, but really liked sex with women, I felt a little offended on your behalf. And I don't know if you felt similarly. I mean, she had initially, I think, lobbied to have Robert Downey Jr. play the part. I don't know if she would have said the same thing had Robert Downey Jr. played Duckie, but did you take that at all personally?
I won't say I was offended, obviously, because I don't, if he was gay, okay, fine. I will say that I wasn't going for that, and that for me, the sort of particular representation was somebody like me, an effeminate heterosexual dork, and so but I also don't want to denigrate the experience of a lot of gay people who saw Duckie as, as an on-screen representation. Duckie is a character. I don't own Duckie. And if you watch the movie and Duckie was gay, then Duckie's gay. But the way that I saw Duckie was that he was not gay, that he was genuinely in love with Molly's character, that it was romantic love, and that he stepped aside later and, went on with his life and hopefully got involved with somebody who was in a band. I'm thinking...
I don't buy it. I had closeted friends in high school, and I mean, if Duckie were gay after watching the film... it was something my friends would sort of skirt the topic of women, or they would occasionally make like a vulgar remark that would sort of suggest that they actually liked sex with women, but they were, thinking back on it, it was transparent that they weren't. Duckie really loved Andy.
That was how I felt. I really felt like he loved her romantically and didn't happen to be gay.
I mean, Duckie was. I mean, we can agree. I mean, I see in Duckie something of myself, which is I need attention and I am needy. And this was something actually Andrew McCarthy, I think that you had mentioned once, that Andrew McCarthy said on the DVD commentary of the film, that describing you, he said he was just so needy. And I'm like, well, God, who isn't at that age needy? I mean, they weren't needy. I mean, was he not needy? Did you take? You must. I wondered how to interpret that.
Well, he was obviously he was needy. He was a guy with an alcohol problem at the time, and so we all need different things, But yeah, I could see people getting annoyed with me at the time. I was very, I was very out there, and I put it out there that I wanted to be friends with people, and I wanted to socialize with people.
You asshole!
I know.
What's the matter with
but
you?
That's not cool. That's not cool for teenagers to do, or at least it wasn't at the time, and it wasn't where Andrew and Molly were. They were also, by the way, teenagers in the public eye, so they were understandably more cautious than just run-of-the-mill teenagers.
Just when I read about it, I get this feeling like that it's a cool, uncool kind of dynamic in making this movie, which makes me angry because. That's isn't that the whole point? Is that the John Hughes characters, and maybe I'm wrong about this, was the triumph of the losers.
Yeah, there was that was absolutely an element of it, and I do recall feeling like wow, I'm making this movie, I'm one of the cool people, and then being there and going, oh, maybe I'm not one of the cool people, but by the way, that happens. Still, I still get gigs, and and I still have that moment in the lunch line where they fill my tray with food, and then I look out and I go, where am I going to eat? I still have that. So that never goes away.
Yeah. Watching it again and watching the scene in the record store where you dance and the whole thing. I mean, it was an amazing movie. And I wouldn't bring this up unless there was like sort of a third act in which you come back triumphantly. You said that your movie career imploded.
Oh yes. Just in a glorious fireball of implosion.
Is this to be expected? I mean, do you think that this happens with 9 out of 10 actors that you see who are really something in movies, or is there something specifically that you did to help the implosion? Did you light the fuse?
Yes, I lit the fuse to some degree. I mean, the problem with trying to have a career in films and in movies and in television too is that there's a million moving parts to each thing, and when something works, it's really unusual. Most of the time, movies and TV shows don't quite work, and so chances are, just by the numbers, you're going to do more things that don't work and don't click than things that do. A lot of actors are wonderful at picking those things, and I admire those people tremendously. You know, like Brad, like
who? Like who's the best?
I think
at
Brad
it?
Pitt is amazing at it. Matt Dillon was great at it back in the day. You know, he just kept doing great movie after great. You know, and you're like, Jesus, you know, and you know, he's not a rocket scientist. He's he's a terrific actor, but he's got great taste, you know, or something. But in the case of 1987, when my career gloriously flamed out, it was a combination of I started making choices based on what I thought audiences liked about me and wanted to see, as opposed to just what I'd be good at as an actor.
Yeah.
You know, I chose a movie called Hiding Out because it was a lead. It was a movie I could produce. It was a comedy with thriller elements. And, you know, Beverly Hills Cop had just been a wildly popular. You know, it started out thriller and then became kind of goofy teen comedy, and that kind of dissonance really, you know, we never nailed that tone in the movie. And then I agreed to do Superman 4, which was a movie that should have been a big budget blockbuster, but Canon Films was doing it, and they had reassembled the entire original cast from the original Superman, Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder and.
Yeah, they must have paid a fortune for everybody.
I'm sure.
It's,
and that's where all the money went, because they ran out of money to make the movie. And so the movie is a mess.
Is there one crystallizing moment where you realize, fuck, this is really not going well?
Yes.
Was there one specific
I had
moment?
done another movie with a director named Penelope Spheris, who ended up directing Wayne's World. But at the time, she was kind of an indie film director, and she asked me to do this tiny little independent cowboy movie. It was a punk western called Dudes. And I was excited about it because I thought, you know, this will be my little critic's darling indie, you know, da-da-da. I was not the right guy for the lead in that movie. I was just trying to play leads because I thought I'm supposed to be playing leads right now, you know.
Yeah.
But the moment I realized that my career was tanking was after Hiding Out came out and did not do well. But you figure, okay, that's one movie. Then Superman 4 is this legendary fiasco, but at least it comes out. Dudes played in one theater in New York City, and I remember this, and it was not a cool art house that it played in. Okay. But I remember seeing a tiny ad in the paper and going, "Wow, I'm done." You know, this is not that I myself was saying I'm finished with show business, but just show business is finished with me.
Really,
and that all occurred within 1 year. You get a certain amount of heat. And that lasts, you know, that'll get you through a couple of flops, but you got to start making people some money. And I was not making money for people. And, you know, that's unfortunately the bottom line.
That must have been extraordinarily hard. I mean, we can laugh about it now, you know, all these years later, but I mean, this must have been very difficult. I think that you've said that you got depressed, you gained weight. It must have been, how long did that period of being down last?
That lasted a couple of years. I then did CBS signed me to do a TV show with them, and we developed a show called The Famous Teddy Z, which was about show business, which was kind of risky to begin with, you know, but it was with Hugh Wilson, who had done WKRP in Cincinnati, which I loved. And so I was very excited about it. But that was a case of, once again, I took it because it was Hugh and CBS, and I thought, okay, here we go. But, you know, the show came out, and the interesting thing about that was the critics loved that, and but audiences didn't love it, unfortunately. And we were only getting like 18 million viewers a week, which now would be a gold mine. But back then, It was a huge drop from, I think our lead-in was Murphy Brown at the time, which was a huge hit. So that's when I hit bottom, when I said, wow, you know, because back in the day, television was considered secondary to movies. Nowadays, you know, it's all kind of mashed together. In fact, streaming arguably is the height of the business now. But back then, it was considered a sort of well-paying ghetto, you know. Yeah. And so I took that step, and even in that step failed. That's when I got very down about it. And but I never felt like I wouldn't keep doing this as an actor.
Was there ever a moment where you thought I'm gonna be a civilian? I'm gonna I don't know, sell real estate? Did you ever entertain anything?
There was something
like
that later. Yeah, a few years later, just in the early 2000s, I had done 2 other shows for the Fox network. I had done a show called Partners and another one called Getting Personal, both of which were terrific work experiences and characters I loved. And even those had died after Partners died after a season, and Getting Personal died after 17 episodes, something like that. And after that, I started hitting this very, very cold period where people just did not. I had been exposed as an actor. I had gotten a lot of opportunities, a lot of fantastic opportunities, and just nothing had hit for me. And there was even a joke that I was considered the show killer. Newsweek, they had done an article saying, hey, maybe the reason network television is so bad is because the networks keep hiring people like Jon Cryer. It was me and Lauren Graham.
John is not joking about it. I have the quote in front of me. Wonder why TV is so bad? Because the network keeps hiring the same failure-prone actors.
Yes.
I mean, come on. Failure-prone. I mean, do you feel like critics were especially cruel to you? And just sort of in this day and age now where we think about bullying, I'm looking at some of the stuff that was written like that, especially in Ken Tucker. I hesitate to even actually read what he wrote about you for the famous Teddy Z. I won't do it. I know actors are fragile, so I won't do it. But he wrote something very unflattering about you, and I thought, God, doesn't this guy understand that these people are human beings? Especially when somebody's down. It's one thing if they've got a hit show and you want to say that they're no good in a hit show, but if somebody's got a failing show, you're gonna kick them when they're down. I mean, did you feel targeted?
No, mostly because I grew up in show business. My parents were always in this. So the reality of how critics get at you was always present. So that never hit me that hard. I have kind of a thick skin in that respect. Although that does explain, I never read the Ken Tucker thing. And I ended up meeting him one night in a bar, and he was very quiet and circumspect. And now I know why.
You wrote a letter to Newsweek. You wrote a very funny letter to Newsweek, which was, funny, but you could tell that you were a little heartbroken in it.
Well, it was
in response.
The point. When they had labeled me as one of the reasons that network television is so bad, I thought, wow, that's a pretty big thing that apparently I have power over. But yes, I had written them. You overcome these things with humor. And the funny thing was.
But not fucking funny, John. It's your business. You have to make you have kids. You're trying to go out and get jobs. You have a show that's going to get canceled, and you have Newsweek calling you a show killer? This is not good for business. It was not
good for business. But the interesting thing, and these things turn around because after 2.5 Men started and it took off, I ran into the editor of Newsweek at one of the network functions, and he told me that the letter that I had sent in had gone there. This was back in 1995 or something, had gone viral. That being, this was before things actually went viral.
Like it was mimeographed?
Yes, exactly. And it was passed around the office because they thought it was very funny. So he asked actually if Newsweek could now write an article about the revenge of the show killers, which is that a lot of the people that they had named had actually been on very successful things since then, like Lauren Graham had since done Gilmore Girls, So to their credit, Newsweek tried to balance the scales. And actually, the article about the Revenge of the Show Killers was got much bigger play than the original hateful article.
2.5 Men ran for 12 seasons on CBS. Cryer won his first Emmy in 2009 for supporting actor in a comedy series. And here he is, accepting on behalf of Hina's co-star, who was nominated in the lead actor category, but would lose later in the night to Alec Baldwin for 30 Rock.
Charlie Sheen is amazing, and he needs one of these. He makes it look so easy, and it's not. It is not. He's amazing. So thank you, man. This is yours. Thanks, guys.
When Cryer won another Emmy, this time in the lead actor category in 2012, he didn't mention Sheen, who had been fired from the show 18 months before. To remember exactly why he got fired, let's do another nostalgic needle drop back to the year 2011.
I expose people to magic. I expose them to something they're never otherwise going to see in their boring, normal lives. And I gave that to them. I may forget about them tomorrow, but they'll live with that memory for the rest of their lives. And that's a gift, man.
I have a disease, and I cured it with my brain, with my mind. I'm cured. I'm done.
I blinked and I cured my brain. That's how. Everybody has the power. Can't is the cancer of happen. Can't is the cancer of happen. It was written for normal people. People that aren't special. People that don't have tiger blood and, Adonis DNA. The run I was on made Sinatra, Flynn, Jagger, Richards, all of them just look like, droopy-eyed, armless children. I mean, come on, bro. I won Best Picture at 20. Wasn't even trying. Wasn't even warm. I'm tired of pretending like I'm not special. I'm tired of pretending like I'm not bitching a total freaking rock star from Mars. Let's just do it. Let's meet this thing head on. And you were in it to win it. Wow, winning. Duh. Winning.
Winning in what sense?
Just winning, just being happy.
Because some would
just
say
winning.
that you're defeated now.
They can say that, but what kind of car are they driving? Oops, winning. But occasionally, a giant marquee name comes through on your caller ID, and it's like, winning, 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 winning.
So you got 2.5 Men, which started in 2003. Now, a couple episodes ago, we had David Chase on this podcast, who merrily pissed on the grave of the career of Les Moonves, who turned down The Sopranos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Les Moonves did not want. He was basically dead set against you playing the Alan Harper role. He said that you have basically a stink on you. Wasn't that pretty much what he was getting at? That you were an 80s actor and you were a show killer. He did not want you in this role. Maybe I'm overstating it. Was that kind of the way it went?
That was the word that we got back from the network, was that they already had Charlie Sheen. They didn't want to sort of load it up as like this 80s film actor thing, which is a lot nicer way of saying what you just said.
I'm so sorry, John. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
This is why I'm terrible at my job. Is that I'm sorry.
No apologies necessary. I had been told by Chuck Lorre, who was the producer on 2.5 Men, that he had never seen anybody change Les's mind. That once Les has a thing about an actor for a particular role, that is, it's worthless to try and turn him around. But yet he gave it a try on 2.5 Men, partially because 2.5 Men cast at the very end of pilot season that particular year, and all of the good actors were taken. So,
who do you think did you ever get a sense of who Les would have preferred?
No, that was the big problem, was that the network had said, we'd love a new face, and they just couldn't find one that had the right vibe with Charlie. So I had done Hot Shots with Charlie Sheen 10 years before that, and he and I had remained on good terms. We had run into each other at various things, like when he was doing Spin City for ABC, I had a pilot there and stuff like that. But, when we actually started working together on 2.5 Men, it was just so easy. I mean, it was just, he and I just got each other and got the timing, and it was just one of those things.
So at the time, and I'm trying to get myself back to 2003, was I think that the whole character that Charlie played, whose name was Charlie, was like this libertine, like has lots of sex, has like a background of doing drugs. Do you think that anybody ever said before the show started, it might be sort of risky putting the show on the shoulders of a guy who parties so much?
That had come up every time Charlie got a job. In the all the way through the 90s, it was, hey, this guy parties a lot. I mean, remember when he took over from Michael J. Fox on Spin City, there were all these people saying, you sure you want to hire that guy, because he's he may go off. But he didn't on Spin City. And by the time 2.5 Men rolled around, he'd been sober for 2 years, and he was very, very proud of that. And so I remember at our very first photo shoot, he showed me a chip, and he was like, 2 years, and yeah. So he was really at the time grateful for that people were giving him a chance, and everybody was very hopeful with Charlie. I would say those first 2 years on 2.5 Men were just incredible, and he was great. he was absolutely great. You know, he was lovely to work with, you know, friendly. You know, his life was together. He was with Denise Richards, and he had kids, and you know, so you know that he was clearly trying to build a different life. Then once his marriage fell apart, that's when it started going off the rails.
Yeah.
And
it was interesting. So it seems like you were both you were going through a divorce at the same time, and he went through his divorce with Denise Richards, and it sounded like he had for a period of time showed you sort of pictures of like disembodied vaginas, which he had encountered in his travels, which is interesting because I suppose there's a variety. I'm sort of more about. I mean, I love a vagina, but I kind of want to see what's attached to it too. You know, did this seem like odd behavior to you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was always a person who was baffled by masculinity. So that whole sort of braggadocio of like, this is my lady, you know, and that particular act, which was very strange, that he would say, I was out with a girl last night. You want to let me show you a picture? And I expected a headshot. You know, I did not expect the nether thing. And for God's sake, I hope it was consensual. I hope, I hope she understood that she was giving a picture of that, because otherwise it was incredibly disgusting. But, again, I would see that. And also, by the way, this is a workplace. It wouldn't have this was something he never would have done in the first couple of years we were working together. And in retrospect, I should have said, hey, man, not necessary. This is a workplace. But at the time, I just kind of went, and sort of, because, he was becoming slowly, he was becoming that guy who started talking about Alex Jones on InfoWars and, that 9/11 was a conspiracy and and he was becoming a different person, and you hope that he can go back to being the guy that you knew a couple of years ago. But you also don't know where it's going to end up.
I think about that story of the vaginas, and I think about, you also tell a story about how, like, Denise was coming to the set and he brought you a big bag of, like, what sounded like very vanilla kind of porn, like straight porn. But then you hear, like, you look in his divorce papers, Denise said he was, like, looking at gay porn, he was looking at child porn, his consigliere who... I don't know. If I'm gonna go to battle with CBS, I don't know if I'm gonna send Lenny Dykstra to do my bidding. But he sent Lenny Dykstra at the top of this and Lenny said he was very involved with transsexuals. Do you think that there was possibly in showing you these vaginas and giving you this bag? Do you think that it's possible that this was just sort of this elaborate closet?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I really don't know with Charlie. I don't know what he was at for. I think it was just a gesture at camaraderie, and a gesture at sort of normalizing. Hey, we're guys in a world where there's plenty of women. Ha ha ha. I think that's what he was going for at the time. That he got into much different sexual practices later, he never would bring up with me.
I wonder if your initial emotion was, when things started going off the rails, when, he trashed a room in the Plaza in New York. He got arrested in Aspen for alleged spousal abuse. I think if I were you and I'd been kind of in the wilderness for a long time, I think my first thought would be like, oh my God, this guy's going to fuck my shit up. I have this amazing gig. I mean, I would secondarily be like, I hope my friend is okay. But I mean, was this your feeling? Was this like, what? He's going to ruin it.
Well, to a certain extent, yeah, because it's everybody's workplace. I mean, the whole show shuts down without him. So yes, that was on my mind. But by far the biggest thing was that I was worried he was back using drugs again, and that he would die from it. That was my biggest concern. And in retrospect, I should have been more concerned about his wife as well. And the women that he was with. He was with Brooke, and he was with the woman in the Plaza.
You're not talking about the two women that were living with him during the what was it?
Yeah,
Violent Torpedoes of Truth period.
Those,
no, you weren't so concerned with those ladies.
Concerned with those ladies, but if it's being alleged that he's threatening people and or possibly hurting them, then that's horrific, and I should have been confronting him about that, but I didn't because I was scared for my job, and But if ever there was somebody who was in a position, it probably would have been me, and I regret that I didn't. But
is there anything you could have done, do you think, that to sort of, what's interesting is there's a coda to this whole thing, which is, in the last episode of 2.5 Men, he never came back. I mean, there was this massive speculation in 2015 if he was going to make some sort of cameo at the end. And the whole show was kind of a wink, like Charlie might not be dead. It was very funny conceit, but, in the end, we see no Charlie. We see like sort of a look-alike, correct? From the back?
Yeah.
But in the final vanity card, Chuck Lorre does these vanity cards for all of his shows. He wrote that Charlie was offered a role in the finale where he talked about the dangers of drug abuse, but him being a ninja warrior from Mars was immune to these dangers, and then he'd be killed by a piano. And then he wrote that instead, Charlie wanted us to write a heartwarming scene that would set up his return to primetime TV in a new sitcom called The Harpers, starring him and Jon Cryer. Is there any truth to that? Was that a joke that I'm missing?
That is not
Did he
a joke.
actually want to?
That is not a joke. He approached me personally a year after the show ended, and straight up said, "I want us to do this again. I want to just erase the last 4 years of the show and just start over." And I said to him, you want me to get on this roller coaster again? Are you serious?
Did he? So he called you? Did he want to go out for a coffee? Or
No,
something?
his
Or did he just
manager called and said, "Hey, Charlie really wants to talk to you. Would you come by and meet with him?" And I did. I was hoping he'd been clean, and I had heard through people that he had been off of drugs for a little while. And in our meeting, he admitted that the reason that he sort of flew off into those crazy late night rants was because he was doing steroids, and those were basically roid rage. And
Lenny Dykstra said it was oxy. That you can feel like God if you take enough oxy. I don't know. Do we believe Lenny Dykstra? I don't know.
It could have been both, but at any rate, he explained it. He gave kind of a perfunctory apology and said he wanted to start the show back up again. And I said, no, the problem with Charlie is that when things are going great, he blows it up. That's, it's a classic thing with people dealing with alcoholism. And so, let's say I did start doing the show with him again. God forbid it was successful.
Yeah.
So I said a polite no to that.
I mean, ironically, he seemed to somehow negotiate what sounded like a very big pay raise after he had, I think, trashed the hotel room. I mean, he was well into his bad behavior, and he somehow went to CBS and said, well, I'm in the midst of all this, but you've got to pay me more. And I think that, did I read that he was at that point, he negotiated so he's making like 3 times what you were making?
Almost. Almost actually. I actually was able.
Oh, I'd be infuriated.
I was actually able to talk to a Warner Brothers executive who was there at the time, and I said, "So did he get that ridiculous pay raise because he was so crazy?" And they said, "Yes, because once you threaten to walk away, and they actually believe you because you're acting absolutely insane." They felt like they had no choice to keep the show going. The amazing thing, though, that because show business is not famous for doing the right thing when people are dealing with addictions. It's famous for squeezing the last bit of work they can out of somebody and then tossing them aside. But interestingly, Warner Brothers, the reason that Charlie Sheen was fired was straight up because Warner Brothers had bent over backwards to arrange for help for him, in every possible way. And he just kept throwing it back in their face. And what I expected them to do at the time was to just lay off, have him show up at work, shoot the show, pay him this ridiculous amount of money, and wait until he dies of an overdose, But instead, they fired him and said, you're done. We're not going to be here to assist you killing yourself. And I thought that was a really rare bit of corporate responsibility in that case.
Yeah. Did you, I mean, in the midst of that rare bit of corporate responsibility, did you say that's ridiculous? What, I show up for work every day? I don't leave anybody waiting and I don't get a raise?
No, I didn't. I did not place it that way. I mean, we were all, the thing is that by that point, my salary was more money than I had ever expected to be paid as a human. Nobody ever tried to screw me on that show. So there will be zero complaints from me.
I have a psychology question for you because I don't understand. He was making quite a bit of money per episode, and then he went on and got this ridiculous deal for anger management, which didn't work out. But, he said recently he's very contrite about what happened, and he talked about how he was sort of a cause for a while. And he was quoted in this February. He's talking about him being a cause, and he says, "Oh yeah, great. I'm so glad I traded early retirement for a fucking hashtag." How do you go through as much money? I mean, I think I read he was a gambler, but how do you make that much money? How do you spend it? I mean, I guess it's a question for Johnny Depp. It's a question, I think, for Nicolas Cage. But do you have any insight?
I don't know that I do. Because I too am mystified because the amount of money that he was making were just astonishing. Before he did the show, I talked to some of his managers. And they had he had bought a warehouse, it was an airplane hangar to house all of the exotic cars that he had. And they were in charge of selling off the exotic cars because he had gone broke buying exotic cars. And to me, it has always been a huge mystery how a human being spends the astonishing sums that he was making. It can't be drugs because you'd just be dead. No,
I mean, that's what I mean. I remember when I remember reading an Aerosmith when they were coming back, like in the 80s, a Rolling Stone thing, and they said that it's not the cocaine that's expensive; it's the things that you do when you're on the cocaine. In looking back, I mean, it was a little over. I think most of the really ridiculous stuff happened in 2011, so it was about 10 years ago. And when Trump came along, I did feel like a sense of deja vu, and I don't think I quite sort of figured it out until recently that the whole Charlie Sheen drama, which felt like a news cycle, it felt like a person who was applauded by basically sort of this dystopian crowd of like meth heads. Did it look similar to you?
Oh yeah. I commented on that. I actually went during the primaries. I went on a talk show. This is back when the Republicans still had a shot of picking somebody else. I said, "Hey, you may want to think about that. It's not a great idea to have a president who just says every stupid thing that comes into his head." Because I was just working with a guy who said every stupid thing that came into his head, and it just blew up in his face. And I stand by it. I called it back in the day. And, part of Trump's biggest problem, part of his biggest ineptitude is he can't resist baiting people and fighting and people that could have been ostensibly politically his allies. He alienates, and just tries to overpower. And it's one of the reasons he was the most inept and corrupt president.
And that's the thing. That's the lesson of Trump is that the media covered the shit out of it. They just kept coming and giving Charlie Sheen interviews. I mean, Good Morning America. This is a lot of time for somebody to be saying like ridiculous, like either crackhead or I mean, it looks sort of more like bipolar, kind of like if you've ever known anybody that's bipolar, it sort of looked like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Very, very similar. And by the way, there's zero doubt that Charlie Sheen would have been a better president than Donald Trump in my mind, because Charlie does actually try to occasionally be internally consistent. Trump is a total narcissist who is situationally manipulative. He will change. He'll go 180 degrees of his, of whatever he's saying if it suits him at the moment. Charlie isn't like that. Charlie is loyal, which Donald Trump is clearly not. He demands loyalty but gives none. And so I think those two things by themselves would separate him.
It's nothing. Anything's possible. I mean, everybody loves a comeback. Do you think Charlie
they
Sheen
do.
2024?
No thanks.
I wonder, obviously, I think that it probably you would never have to work again because, having that series for as long as you did. But, you finished, you played Lex Luthor in Supergirl, which ended recently. Do you have any residual anxiety about the next job? You may already have the next job, but I mean, is it, after working as hard as you did to be successful, do you worry just about what's going to be next?
Yes, you always do. Because I grew up in a family of actors, there's just always that tension in the air, But there was only a couple of times in my life where I sort of sat back and said, nobody's going to want me, And thankfully, I'm out of that phase. And so, I'd rather be working, but it's okay that I'm not.
Did any part of you, as a person who is in the business of drama, did any part of you sort of enjoy the ride of being on what must have been a surreal day-to-day experience of the Charlie Sheen implosion?
Interestingly, the only thing I wouldn't say enjoyed about it was, but I suddenly had a narrative. And as an actor, I didn't have a narrative. I was just an actor. I'd be in one movie and then another, or a TV show, whatever. And with the public, I was just this guy, Jon Cryer, who was occasionally in movies and television. But suddenly after the Sheen thing, I had a narrative. I was the good lieutenant, supposedly, who stood by and kept the ship running when the captain went crazy. And that's only clearly a tiny part of my story.
It's better than.
But it was interesting to finally.
It's better,
have
John,
one.
than Show Killer, isn't it? It's better.
Yes, yes, I would say it's a little better.
No, it's it's really it's an amazing. I can't wait to see what you do next. I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. It was truly a pleasure.
That's the episode. If you liked it, please subscribe, rate, leave a review, and launch a violent torpedo of truth to tell 3 of your friends. If you don't have one of those violent torpedoes of truth, a text will suffice. This episode was produced by myself, Andrew Goldman, as well as Rob Heath, who every time I see him hands me a new picture of one of his former girlfriend's elbows. Special thanks to Karen Sanfilippo at Image Management PR, my favorite Irish Catholic rabbi, Tom Keeney, as well as the whole team at Los Angeles Magazine, notably Silver Fox editor Meir Roshan. I also want to thank 2 of my castmates from the 1988 Deering High School production of Working, who have been huge supporters of this show. Ted Chambers and Michael Turner, the first a dedicated public school teacher, and the latter the furniture king of Chattanooga with his store Huck and Peck. The Originals is, as always, a highly replaceable production.